Welcome everybody to episode 8 of our French Revolution series, Révolution. In the summer of 1792, France stood at the brink of collapse. Foreign armies were marching toward Paris, the king was suspected of betrayal, and the revolution teetered between survival and total destruction. What followed was one of the most decisive days in French history, when ordinary citizens and the Sans-Culottes rose against the monarchy and forever changed the fate of France. Let's delve into this episode. As always, subscribe, share, leave a comment below, and let me know what you think about this series so far. France is engulfed in war, and Austria is one of the major powers fueling that conflict. Not to save the Queen Marie Antoinette, but to crush the revolution and restore the Ancien regime. Yet, Austria would fail. In the spring of 1792, in the district of Saint-Marcel in Paris, life momentarily seems to take precedence over the political upheaval that has violently shaken the country since 1789. But in reality, the course of the French Revolution has just shifted irrevocably. The French are about to experience a miracle of democracy, a democracy soon tainted by one of the bloodiest periods in their history. In April 1792, France officially declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a conflict that would rage for many years. But why? Louis XVI had secured France's declaration of war against Francis II of Austria, his wife's nephew. The truth, however, is far darker. The king hoped for revolutionary France's defeat, believing it would give him the opportunity to reclaim his absolute power. This political maneuver was not lost on the members of the assembly. They too understood that the king was playing a double game. But with naive optimism, they voted for war. They believed that a victory over Austria and Prussia would strengthen the revolution and unify the nation. But as we know, history doesn't always follow the plans of those in power. Very quickly, fear gripped the country. In the earliest weeks of war, hopes of victory were shattered, replaced instead by panic and despair. The French army suffered repeated defeats, its ranks destabilized by the purge of its officer corps, many of whom were aristocrats. Meanwhile, Prussian forces crossed the border, advancing toward Lille and Paris. In these trying hours, the monarchy's unpopularity reached new heights. Satirical cartoonists seized the moment, circulating a wave of offensive caricatures mocking the king and queen. The public's distrust in the monarchy had grown to staggering levels, and the events that followed would plunge France into deeper unrest. The first signs of this unrest came on June 20th, 1792, when the revolutionary sections of Saint-Antoine and Saint-Marcel, fueled by mounting anger and frustration, marched on the Tuileries Palace. There, they peacefully but forcefully invaded the National Assembly's meeting, demanding action from the government. This was not just another protest, it was a warning. The French people were no longer merely dissatisfied, they were on the verge of rebellion. As the crowds dispersed on June 20th, 1792, the immediate impact was a clear shift in the revolution's tone. The monarchy, though still in place, was now more vulnerable than ever. Louis XVI had been forced to wear a bonnet rouge, a public degradation that marked his symbolic submission to the revolutionary forces. But in reality, this was only the beginning of his downfall. The bonnet rouge was the iconic cap that the revolutionaries were wearing. The true significance of June 20th, 1792 was not the humiliation of the king, but the bold message sent by the Sans-Culottes, the working-class revolutionaries. These were the men and women of the Parisian sections, who had been stirring in the background for years, pushing the revolution to its most radical extremes. The Sans-Culottes were no longer just passive observers. They were now a potent political force, directly confronting the king and demanding more radical changes. This shift in power dynamics would prove pivotal in the coming weeks and months. And while Louis XVI might have thought of June 20th as a simple protest, it was actually a warning, one that the king, surrounded by his royalist advisors, failed to fully comprehend. The demonstrators' demands were clear. They wanted the monarchy's power diminished and ultimately abolished. In the wake of the Tuileries invasion, the stakes grew higher. On the streets of Paris, tension was building. The Sans-Culottes were restless, and the political factions in the assembly were at odds. The revolution was quickly spiraling into a period of intense political violence, as moderates and radicals clashed over the future of the nation. Jean-Paul Marat, a key figure among the radicals, made his voice heard with incendiary rhetoric. His writings were direct calls to actions. For him, the monarchy represented an obstruction to progress and the French people. He said, "Those I call the privilege of the age, those who live easily, suckling at the breast of public administration, fear only one thing, popular uprising, for they destroy the order of things. Uprisings threaten their privileges. That's why they would rather the people remain unaware of their own misery. But in the face of tyranny, the people have always risen." Marat's words would become a rallying cry for the radical revolutionaries, inspiring an even greater sense of urgency. In the French capital, and with each passing day, it became clearer that the revolution was no longer about mere reforms. It was about the complete and total dismantling of the old order and the end to the monarchy, to aristocratic privileges, and to the social structures that had defined France for centuries. A few weeks later, in July 1792, tensions in Paris reached its peak. "The fatherland is in danger," declared the National Assembly. Thousands of volunteers rushed to enlist in defense of their country, to save Paris. The Assembly had to call on reinforcement from every province of the kingdom. But when these volunteers arrived, they only added to the confusion already gripping the capital, especially those from Marseille. The Marseillais stood out even more because they now marched to the sound of a new patriotic song, composed by a young officer named Rouget de Lille. That summer, this war song, originally written for the army of the Rhine, became the anthem of the Marseillais. Written in a single night, its stirring lyrics proclaimed, "Arise, children of the fatherland! The day of glory has finally arrived. Against us, tyranny has raised its bloody banner. To arms, citizens! Form your battalions!" The song quickly spread, becoming the revolutionary anthem sung across the country, known to history as La Marseillaise. But even as volunteers sang of liberty and glory, the enemy was closing in, and the situation took another explosive turn. In a desperate attempt to restore his absolute power, King Louis XVI placed his hopes in foreign intervention. By the summer of 1792, Austria and Prussia were preparing to crush the revolution, their combined armies advancing under the command of Prussian General Charles William Ferdinand, Duke of Brunswick. On July 25th, Brunswick issued a declaration to the French people, a manifesto that would become one of the most infamous documents of the revolution. It warned that if any harm came to the king or queen, the Allied armies would inflict an exemplary and ever memorable vengeance by delivering the city of Paris to military execution and complete destruction, and the rebels guilty of outrages to the punishments they have deserved. But instead of intimidating the revolutionaries, the manifesto had the opposite effect. It enraged them. To the Sans-Culottes, the radical Jacobins, this was undeniable proof that the king was conspiring with foreign monarchs. And so the days ticked closer to August. The manifesto hardened the resolve of the revolutionaries. The final spark came on August 3rd, when the Parisian sections demanded the king's deposition. Of the 48 sections of Paris, 47 voted for a motion demanding the end of the monarchy. But moving from words to action was another matter. Who was truly ready to take up arms against their king? In the Goblin section, which gathered volunteers from Brittany, the section leader made the first decisive move. The Faubourg-Saint-Antoine section had already resolved to march on the Tuileries. Within days, secret coordination developed among the city's sections. The objective was clear: seize control of Paris. At dawn on August 10, 1792, the bell of liberty rang out from the Hôtel de Ville, summoning the people of Paris to rise. The revolutionary sections, which had long been organizing in secret, moved swiftly. The city's legally elected commune, established in 1790, was now pushed aside by an insurrectional commune created by delegates from the sections to direct the uprising. From this moment, the monarchy's fate was sealed. That morning, thousands of Sans-Culottes and volunteers from Brittany and Marseille stormed the royal palace. The Tuileries was defended by the Swiss guards. At first, relations were tense but not hostile. But when gunfire broke out, the palace became a battleground. The Swiss, who had tried to avoid open confrontation, found themselves caught between orders and chaos. Meanwhile, royalist nobles, determined to defend the king to the last, opened fire from rooftops and windows, mowing down dozens of demonstrators. A violent clash had begun. At the first sounds of gunfire, the king and his family took refuge in the chambers of the National Assembly. But their flight only confirmed what many had begun to suspect, that the monarchy's days were numbered. When the Sans-Culottes finally stormed into Salle du Manège, the Assembly's meeting hall, Louis XVI understood the truth. The game was lost. And so on August 10, 1792, the French monarchy collapsed. The king, once seen as a sacred embodiment of the nation, was now a prisoner of the very people who had once bowed before him. The revolution had crossed a point of no return. The streets of Paris were no longer ruled by royal decree, but by the will of the sections, the Sans-Culottes at the pulse of a new republic struggling to be born. The ancient order was crumbling, and what will follow will be even more unpredictable and more violent.